Hey guys, some of you might have seen a video we made some time ago talking about Miyamoto Musashi, who's Japan's most famous samurai, absolutely fascinating character. This is a book written by him in 1632, and you're looking at our copy. It's an old copy that's been read lots and lots of times. It's one of those books, it's not just about martial arts, it's about life in general, and it's one of those books that you can read again and again at different stages in your life and get different things from it every time. So there'll be a link in the description underneath this video if you're interested in this book. There'll be a link underneath this video in the description where you can get it. In the meantime, this is the English translation, and it was translated by Thomas Cleary. And we thought you just might be interested in just a couple of pieces from it. So starting with the translator's preface, and then going to a bit of an introduction, and then maybe just a little bit of what Musashi himself said in the first chapter. So we'll start with the translator's preface. So here we go. The Japanese word shinken means real sword, but it is now more generally used in a metaphorical sense. In common parlance, to do something with a real sword means to do it with utmost earnestness. To have an attitude proper to a real sword means to be deadly serious. Shinken shobu, literally a contest with real swords, means something done in deadly earnest. This molecule of linguistic anthropology hints at a very good reason why the Japanese are as persistent and skilled as they are at survival and adaptation. Through centuries of cultural training under the martial rule of the samurai, the Japanese are generally able to experience and address virtually anything as a life and death situation. This book shows how they do it. So we'll just jump ahead now to about halfway through the translator's introduction. The Book of Five Rings. More properly titled in English, The Book of Five Spheres, Miyamoto Musashi's work is devoted to the art of war as a purely pragmatic enterprise. Musashi decries empty showmanship and commercialization in martial arts, focusing attention on the psychology and physics of lethal assault and decisive victory as the essence of warfare. His scientifically aggressive, thoroughly ruthless approach to military science, while not universal among Japanese martial artists, represents a highly concentrated characterization of one particular type of samurai warrior. Although a vast body of legend grew up around his dramatic exploits, little is known for certain about the life of Miyamoto Musashi. What he says of himself in the Book of Five Rings is the primary source of historical information. He killed a man for the first time when he was 13 years old, for the last time when he was 29. At some point he apparently gave up using a real sword, but continued to inflict mortal wounds on his adversaries until the end of his fighting career. Just as a side note there, with a bokuto, with a wooden practice sword, was what he used. After he gave up using his real sword, he started just carrying a bokuto around, a wooden practice sword, and he used to defend himself with that. He preferred to break bones. In the later part of his life, he preferred to break bones instead of killing people. He'd break their arm instead, because he was always getting challenged, so he'd break their arm or break their leg with his wooden practice sword. Okay, so continuing. The last 3 decades of Musashi's life were spent refining and teaching his military science. It is said that he never combed his hair, never took a bath, never married, never made a home, and never fathered children, although he also took up cultural arts, as indeed he recommends to everyone. Musashi himself basically pursued an ascetic warrior's path to the end. Born into strife, raised in mortal combat, ultimately witnessed to a transition to peacetime policy on a scale unprecedented in the history of his nation, Miyamoto Musashi abandoned an ordinary life to exemplify and hand on 2 essential elements of ancient martial and strategic traditions. The first of these basic principles is keeping inwardly calm and clear, even in the midst of violent chaos. The second is not forgetting about the possibility of disorder in times of order. As a warrior of two very different worlds, a world of war and a world of peace, Musashi was obliged to practice both of these fundamental aspects of the warrior's way in a most highly intensified manner, lending to his work a keenness and a ferocity that can hardly be surpassed. Okay, so we'll turn now to the preface, which is the first part actually written by Musashi. So this is actually the beginning of the Book of Five Rings as written by Musashi. The science of martial arts, called the individual school of two skies, is something that I've spent many years refining. Now, wishing to reveal it in a book for the first time, I have ascended Mount Iwato in Higo province of Kyushu. Bowing to heaven, paying respects to Kannon, I face the Buddha. I am Shinmen Musashi no Kami, Fujiwara no Gishin, a warrior born in the province of Harima, now 60 years old. So, as you can tell, he became a full-on Buddhist later in his life. That was about the same time he stopped using his live sword and started using a wooden practice sword. He decided he didn't want to kill people anymore. He did kill people after that, though, but he became pretty hardcore Buddhist, living up in a little cave up on top of a mountain somewhere, writing this book, apparently. Here we go. I have set my mind on the science of martial arts since my youth long ago. I was 13 years old when I had my first duel. On that occasion I won over my opponent, a martial artist named Arima Kihei of the New School of Accuracy. At 16 years of age I beat a powerful martial artist called Akiyama of Tajima province. When I was 21, I went to the capital city and met martial artists from all over the country. Although I engaged in numerous duels, never did I fail to attain victory. After that, I travelled from province to province, meeting martial artists of the various schools. Although I duelled more than 60 times, never once did I lose. That all took place between the time I was 13 years old and the time I was 29. When I passed the age of 30 and reflected on my experiences, I realized that I had not been victorious because of consummate attainment of martial arts. Perhaps it was because I had an inherent skill for the science and had not deviated from natural principles. It may also have been due to shortcomings in the martial arts of the other schools. In any case, I subsequently practiced day and night in order to attain an even deeper principle, and spontaneously came upon the science of martial arts. I was about 50 years old at that time. Since then I have passed the time with no science into which to inquire. Trusting in the advantage of military science as I turned it into the sciences of all arts and skills, I have no teacher in anything. Now in composing this book, I have not borrowed the old sayings of Buddhism or Confucianism, or do I make use of old stories from military records or books on military science. With heaven and Kannon for mirrors, I take up the brush and begin to write at 4 a.m. on the night of the 10th day of the 10th month, 1643. How cool is that? How cool is that? So there's his own introduction, there's his own preface. So then it starts with the earth scroll. So there's earth, wind and fire and all the breaking up. Some of it's quite obscure, and he often writes really obscure things and then says, this must be studied carefully, and things like that, which can really leave you scratching your head. It's like, well, what do you mean? So we'll just do the start of the Earth Scroll, shall we? It's hard to put this book down once you get going on it. So okay, it's the start of the Earth Scroll, which is the first scroll of the book. The Earth Scroll. Martial arts are the warrior's ways of life. Commanders in particular should practice these arts, and soldiers must also know this way of life. In the present day there are no warriors with certain knowledge of the way of martial arts. First, let us illustrate the idea of a way of life. Buddhism is a way of helping people. Confucianism is a way of reforming culture. For the physician, healing is a way of life. A poet teaches the art of poetry. Others pursue fortune-telling, archery, or various other arts and crafts. People practice the ways to which they are inclined, developing individual preferences. Few people are fond of the martial way of life. First of all, the way of the warrior means familiarity with both cultural and martial arts. Even if they are clumsy at this, individual warriors should strengthen their own martial arts as much as is practical in their circumstances. People usually think that all warriors think about is being ready to die. As far as the way of death is concerned, it is not limited to warriors. Mendicants, women, farmers, and even those below them know their duty, are ashamed to neglect it, and they resign themselves to death. There is no distinction in this respect. The martial way of life practiced by warriors is based on excelling others in anything and everything, whether by victory in an individual duel or by winning a battle with several people. One thinks of serving the interests of one's employer, of serving one's own interests, of becoming well known and socially established. This is all possible by the power of martial arts. Yet there will be people in the world who think that even if you learn martial arts, this will not prove useful when a real need arises. Regarding that concern, the true science of martial arts means practicing them in a way that they will be useful at any time, and to teach them in such a way that will be useful in all things. So the extension of those of you who've practiced martial arts, quite often, more often than not, the greater benefit to the actual fighting itself is the way it teaches you about life and about how to live life and that sort of thing. And the more you get into this book, the more he talks like that as well. And there's so much from this book, there's so many things you can get from it just in day-to-day life and how you go about your day-to-day life. It's quite inspiring, a lot of it. So anyway, that's probably enough of that for today. So this was something a bit different, wasn't it? Hopefully somebody enjoyed that, and if you did, we might do a bit of something similar in the future. But in the meantime, if you're interested in that book, there's a link underneath this video to our Amazon influencer page and the same copy of the book, the same version of the book. We think this is the better one. We've seen a couple of different versions. This one by Thomas Cleary is pretty good. So if you're interested in that, there's a link underneath this video in the description. Hope you enjoyed that. More videos coming soon.